More on the Kings coming up in the final hour here, but all guests are coming to you via the Fire Wings hotline. Try one of their delicious flavors of wings today. Fire Wings, just wing it. You're the highlight to come into the hour of the Chiefs dismantling of the Raiders, and Jon Gruden basically saying, yeah, we never got anything going. It was a mess. It's been a mess for 2 weeks. Let's bring in Scott Bair, our Raiders insider, to help us sort this all out. Scott, how are you today?
Good, and just so we're on the record, I would have taken Lamar Jackson. If I were GM of any team, that's the guy that I would have taken. I love a little revisionist history. It always makes me look good.
It always works.
It always works.
Yeah.
And, of course, everybody thought Lamar Jackson was the obvious pick in that spot for the Raiders, right?
Oh, I mean, just imagine what the Raiders receiver core would look like if Lamar Jackson was a receiver like Bill Foley and told him to.
Yeah.
Man, they'd be so good.
Well, we talked to you a week ago. The Jets game was a surprise. I don't think this Chiefs outcome ultimately was a surprise, but now there's 4 to go. Obviously, their most difficult game is this weekend against the Titans. It's a huge game for their playoff hopes. It eases up after that, but I don't know. Do you have a number in mind, Scott? Do they have to win all 4 to have any hope? Do they have to go 3-1? What's the plan of attack here to find a way for the Raiders to get in?
I think their margin of error is pretty much gone. I mean, if they lose to Tennessee, it's DOA, no matter what, because they need a tiebreaker over Tennessee, and then they need to kind of pray for rain for Pittsburgh to fall by the wayside, although Pittsburgh has some tough games coming up against the Bills and the Ravens, and I forget who they're playing this week, but it's not an easy game. But nonetheless, there's some opportunities for Pittsburgh to fall back, but I think, that you're right, that Jets game would have given them a bit more cushion than they have right now. Yeah, I mean, I would say for them to feel comfortable, win out's probably the way to do it.
So, Dr. Bair, diagnose it. I understand getting spanked at Arrowhead. Mahomes is back and really back in rhythm now. You're at Arrowhead. It's a tough place to play. There's no shame in the game. They got blown out, but I personally don't care if it's a 2-point win or a 2-point loss or a 20-point loss. It's a loss. What has happened? What happened going into that Jets game, and what has continued to go on offensively, if you can put your finger on it or them? Why are the Raiders seemingly a completely different team the last 2 weeks?
I think I'm stealing this from LaDainian Tomlinson, who said this to me a billion years ago. Scott, it's the trials of so many miles, is what he was saying, because they took a bunch of East Coast trips and had 10 a.m. games and all that type of thing. And I think it's a cumulative effect, right, that they went on that huge 5-game road trip and they went everywhere. And let's not forget, they've been surviving, by the skin of their teeth for a long time and playing these high-stress environment games. And they went through all that, and then they came home, and they took a big exhale, and they enjoyed themselves for a month, just relaxing and finding a good routine. And then they're like, oh, wait, you still have to travel again? And then they went to New York, and they got stuck on the tarmac for 2.5 hours, and they didn't get into their hotel till 2 a.m. And that was Friday, and they never adjusted, and it's been cold and mucky and all those types of things. And frankly, they haven't been very good on the road no matter what.
Right.
So I think ultimately, I've always kind of wondered, all right, so which defensive injury is going to be like the straw that kind of broke the whole thing, or kind of messed up their equilibrium a little bit? Maybe it was Carl Joseph, right? I'm not saying that he was the key to everything, but maybe that was the one that was just too much, plus all this other stuff, and they just haven't responded. But no matter what, we don't know if this team can play in inclement weather. Like, we don't know about that. We don't know if they can kind of keep this thing going and get back on track. The crazy thing is, you talk about that Chiefs game, right? They held Patrick Mahomes to his lowest yardage total ever. They had a pick taken away by the Wizard of Oz, as Jon Gruden put it, and they had one fall in Nevin Lawson's hands, who's gone more than 3,000 snaps without a pick, and he dropped it, right? So defensively, they kind of figured it out, right? But it's all these things where the reason why I say the fatigue thing, right, is that the discipline goes away, right? Like when you're a little tired. And some of the detail-oriented things that have helped them survive have helped them kind of fall by the wayside. And everybody points to their minus 87-point differential. You win close, you lose big. The losing big, I think, is another one of those things where it kind of spirals, And as Josh Jacobs said against the Jets, they kind of gave up. And those are the types of things that you see when you're basically out of gas and the adrenaline's run out.
Scott, this might be a bigger picture question, I guess, but I felt like this time a year ago there were plenty of questions out there whether Jon Gruden, it was year 1 of 10, but like, can he still coach? Like that was something that was thrown out there. This year, I feel like he's actually done a really good job, and if they compare that with some good personnel additions, that they might actually have something going forward. Do you think this overall is going in a proper direction with coaching, GM, and personnel to be successful in the longer term?
I do, and it comes down to the draft class and the ability of Mike Mayock to pick those mid-round guys. Now, Jon Gruden's a personnel czar, and he's going to pull the trigger on some of these higher guys, but Mike Mayock did a fantastic job of getting this young foundation in there, and he's going to have to do it again, and then probably again, because I think all that is really showing positive signs. I think Jon Gruden as a play caller, while it hasn't been perfect the last couple of weeks, I think talked about somebody else who may be getting tired. Right, it's the old Energizer Bunny. He's looking a little haggard these days. He's not 35 anymore, but nonetheless, I think he's a good play caller. I think Paul Gunther is a good play caller, and his defense needs to get built up. The one question that I have, right, is this team has made a bunch of trades, right? Martavis Bryant, thumbs down, right? Antonio Brown didn't work. Trevor Davis, 6th-round pick, but whatever. Maybe Mike Mayock can get a starter from a 6th-round pick, right? Cut. Zay Jones, invisible. Okay, so those are the trades. The free agent acquisitions. Trent Brown looks pretty good. That one was a safe bet, and it worked, even though it was expensive. But after that, Tyrell Williams, $11 million. Can you get a better receiver for $11 million? Probably. Yeah. Can you get a better cornerback for $11 million than LaMarcus Joyner? Probably. Right. So a lot of their free agent decisions and a lot of their trades, you can question those. So ultimately, I think that there are clearly positive signs here, but there needs to be more if they want to really expedite this whole thing. I mean, Vontaze Burfict didn't work out. A lot of these signings that they're pulling off the scrap heap, which is always tough, haven't necessarily panned out. So there is cause to question some of their personnel moves. They've had a lot of setbacks that they have survived, and if you want to get going by 2020, really going, you have to do better and stick landings with the high-priced free agents.
Scott Bair joining us. Scott, always following your Twitter, and you've been talking a lot lately about Josh Jacobs, and that is certainly a pick that was not a miss. You were going over some numbers he had. 61 missed tackles this season. The next closest running back has 53, surpassed 50 yards rushing after contact 9 times in 12 games. He's obviously a bell cow. He's obviously a hard runner. So you factor that in as a building block. How would you grade the rest of this year's draft?
I think it's been pretty great because of the mid-rounds, really 2 through 5, have all been really good. Max Crosby, has been a revelation, and Foster Moreau has been good, and Hunter Renfrow is coming into his own. And I think that this concept of a lot of guys from winning programs and guys that have developmental capabilities and the work ethic to get that done, I think has been pretty impressive. Cleveland Ferrell at number 4, right, is the one where and we always kind of talked, right, maybe higher floor, lower ceiling, although he's still kind of coming into his own, I guess. He's really only gotten sacks in 2 games, good run player, a serviceable guy, but with number 4, right, like you want gold there. And for as much as they thought Josh Allen from Jacksonville, hindsight's 2020, right? But they thought Josh Allen was a 4-3 player. He's got 8 sacks and a 4-3 in Jacksonville and doing pretty well. And let's go back to that. I think I was asked on our Raiders TV show, was the Kansas City game the biggest game of the Jon Gruden era? And I said, probably. But I would go back and say, if we're talking about the biggest something of the Jon Gruden era, the worst win of the Jon Gruden era was last year in Arizona, where Marcel Aitman caught a crazy ball down the sideline. Derek Carr pushed him into field goal range, and Daniel Carlson, back when he was going strong, knocked one through the uprights back at State Farm Field, and they beat the Arizona Cardinals. And they were cheering, and they were pumped fists and the whole shebang, right? They don't make that field goal, or they don't push into field goal range, and they lose that game, and you are 100,000 billion% talking about Nick Bosa in silver and black.
Man.
Period. End of sentence, right? That was a big deal for that team at that moment, but if you look at it in the grand scheme, you would have Nick Bosa on this team. You would have the second pick. He would lock stock. They were trying to get him during the draft, right? They love that kid. And then, of course, I'm creating this utopian, vision now, right? But then you got Bosa off one end, and then you got Crosby off the other, and then you got Jacobs in the backfield, and then, and wow, right? And that's pretty awesome. But nonetheless, they won that game. They have Cleveland. They hope he can develop. But I don't know. If it's me, I think you're probably in the market for another edge rusher.
What has this year done, Derek Carr's year specifically, done to answer questions about him being the guy going forward, or has it caused any more concerns? His year hasn't been bad. I don't know that it's been great. What has Derek Carr done this year as far as his future as a Raider?
Yeah, I think this is a huge stretch. It just is. And I think that Kansas City game, which didn't go great, was a big deal. And it's weird, right? This guy, we could sit here and I could throw a bunch. He's having a career year with a number of statistical categories. I had a long podcast with him last week that I recommend. I think in a lot of ways is still evergreen. He talks about the criticism that he always gets, and he talks about how he's handling it and the import of this season and a lot of those different things. And just to kind of summarize it, basically, that he said that he's grown numb to it, right? And the thing about statistics, and he mentioned this too, is that there's so many now, right, with advanced metrics coming from baseball to other sports and things like that, that you can find any statistic to prove whether he's the greatest player that you've ever seen or he sucks, right? And I'm getting really sick of the statistical arguments that he stinks, right? Because the argument's getting thinner. I'd rather people who don't like him just come out and say, you know what, I don't like him. Okay, cool. That's your stance, right? And ultimately, I think that's fine. You pay your ticket price or you pay for your jersey, you can say whatever you want, right? But don't try to fool me with numbers that the guy is not a good quarterback, okay? So that's my point. He's a very good quarterback. He executes this scheme well, which, whatever, involves a lot of checkdowns, as I've said 1,000 times before. But now I'm going to argue against myself, okay? So we have that point, that he's a very good functional NFL quarterback. He deserves to be a starter for a long time. Okay, flip side, right? Jon Gruden, I don't know this to be the case for a fact, but as you mentioned, this is year 2 of 10, and that's a decade in this system, or a decade back in the NFL, and maybe this coaching tenure, right, is somewhat finite, right? That this decade is going to be the decade that he's going to give himself. I don't know that to be the case, but let's just use it as an argument, right? Is he going to go through the decade with a very, very good quarterback that he hopes he can build a team around to become a steady playoff contender, or is he going to go into this draft or the next one and wait for not a very good quarterback, but a really special one, right? That we've seen come out with, I don't know, the guy they just faced in Kansas City, right? Who can throw 60 yards with both feet in the air, or Lamar Jackson, or Deshaun Watson, or all of these young, exciting talents that are emerging from the college ranks. Are you going to go look at one of those guys and say, "Oh, I got 2 first-round picks. I can package to go get the guy that I think is truly special, who can make magic happen," or am I going to take the very good guy and then hope that I can build enough around him to make this group special enough that this very good guy is good enough, right? So that's our argument here, and that is me trying to answer your question, is that's why we cannot guarantee that Derek Carr will be the quarterback in Las Vegas. Just can't, because you don't know if Jon Gruden's going to get to that point. He's going to go through the process, going to take another college quarterback to a fancy dinner and fall head over heels. Because it's possible, because when you have very good, there's always the possibility of a generational talent out there, and we've seen them come out in recent years. So that's where we are. That's why there is no guarantee. That's why this next game is huge, and the games after that, and how Derek Carr finishes, because we all know he's very good. Stop trying to argue with me about that. But is he truly special? Is he going to keep Jon Gruden from looking elsewhere? That is going to be the key as we head down the stretch.
Well, with just 2 minutes left, as we talk to Scott Bair to put a bow on that conversation with Gruden, there's the micro view. We're in the middle of the season right now, but if you zoom out to 50,000 feet, they've got the Titans and Jags at home, the Chargers and Broncos on the road. Let's say you and I are both going to Vegas. We're probably putting money down that they'll finish 2-2. Although with what happened in Arizona, let's not go to Vegas. That's a bad subject. Is it as simple as saying year 1 of Jon Gruden's 4-12, year 2 of Jon Gruden's probably going to be 8-8? That's improvement. He's doing a good job.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. It's weird because when they're sitting there at 3-2, coming home from London, and 6-4 after that 3-game road trip, right? The natural tendency, fans only care about this year, right? They want to win right now, is that the bar sneaks upward, right? And then it changes, and then you're like, "Ooh, playoffs! That sure sounds fun. Ooh, 10-6, that's possible. Let's get excited about that." And then you land at 8-8, and you go, "Huh." Right? But to your point, when you stretch it back out, I think that's when you can really look at it and appreciate the fact that they have made progress, that they have done a lot of good things. They still have a long way to go. You know, this whole better than the sum of their parts line that I use too much is accurate, right? But it's only accurate when it works. And at some points, like I was saying before, when it's mile 25 of 26 in the marathon, that better than some of its parts thing starts kind of falling apart. But ultimately, I think no matter what happens, unless they lose out, I think that you'll look back at it and say, all right, they made the strides that they need to make. Maybe they're on more of a standard pace for this rebuild as opposed to an expedited one, but there's nothing wrong with that. And every team makes mistakes in personnel. Every team makes financial mistakes. They can get out from under them, and they can continue to remake this team in a mold that Jon Gruden wants as he progresses through this decade that he has set out for him.
Well, Scott, we always enjoy chatting with you. Enjoy the week, and we will talk to you again next week. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
You.
The Drive.